Hey, it's Josh again. So right now we're going to go over the quadratic formula and really where it came from and also what it's kind of used for. So this right here is the nice, funny quadratic formula. I first learned it by a little song with the tune of Pop Goes the Weasel. You can look that up on your own time. I'd rather not sing it. I bet you probably wouldn't want to hear me. And so where it actually comes from, this equation right here. This is a general quadratic equation, and we want to solve for it to equal to 0. And the way we do it is actually completing the square. And so, we'll go over this real quick. I'll briefly go over it. So when we complete the square, we want to make sure that in front of the x squared is a 1, not a 2. So in order to be fair with math, let's divide everything by 2 on both sides. So now we have x squared plus 2x plus 7, and that still equals 0. And the way we complete the square, we focus on really this thing right here. So what we do for that is we take this number, or in this case this is the b value, or the middle value, the one connected to an x. We divide it by 2. And so now we have 2 divided by 2, and that equals 1. And then what we want to do is we want to square it. And that will be a term that we add. And you'll see why. Okay, so we're right here. So now we have x squared plus 2x. Oh, and then we do the 1 squared, which is just 1. So plus 1. Oh, but in order to do this, we have to be fair. We still have that plus 7, but remember how this one right here, we divided by 2 on both sides? That means we also have to add 1 on the other side. And that's just so we can do things on both sides. It has to be legal if we want to make it the same. We have to do it on both sides. So now, let's focus on this right here. Okay, so now we have this back out again. So the reason why we did that is because let's focus on this thing right here. If we factor that, that's actually going to be x plus 1 times x plus 1. Oh, and that's just x plus 1 squared. And we solve that plus 7, and that equals 1. Our whole point to completing the square is we want to factor it into something squared. So what we do right here, we subtract 7 on both sides. So x plus 1 squared equals negative 6. And then the way we solve for x is, we take the square root of both sides. And we're going to be left with, x plus 1 equals plus or minus square root of negative 6. And then solve for x, and that's how we usually get it. That's how you complete the square. So first, you add the magic number, which what we did is we take the middle one, divide by 2, and then square it. So 2 divided by 2, and then squared. That's how you complete the square. So let's apply that to this. So what we first did is we got rid of that a, or the first letter. So this one we have to divide by a on everything. So that means we're left with 8x squared plus b over ax plus c over a equals 0 over a. On the right side, that's just 0. So I'll just say that equals 0. Okay. So now what we want to do, we want to complete the square. But first, let's just move this over to the right side. I think that might be a little bit better. And the way we have to do that is we have to subtract on both sides. So now we're left with x squared plus b over a x equals, and now it's a 0 minus c over a, so minus c over a. Okay. And now, in order to complete the square, what we did last time is we took the middle one. So we took this b over a. So let's do that. So what we do with that one, before we divided by 2, or we can multiply by 1/2. It's the same thing. So b over 2a. Then what we did is we squared that. Okay, and that is just, yeah, it should just be b squared over 4a squared. Okay, all right, because that's going to help. So let's remember that. All right, so now what we have is we now have, put this back in blue, x squared plus b over a x that's b plus b squared over 4a squared. And remember, we have to do it on both sides. So now we have b squared over 4a squared minus c over a. Okay. Okay, so now that we have this, and remember the magic number that we added was the yellow one right here. So now we can rewrite this as x plus b over 2a squared. And that's just from completing the square and factoring that out. Then we have b squared minus 4a squared minus c over a. Okay. And while we're at it, how about let's make a common denominator here, because we have two fractions subtracted to each other. That usually means we find a common denominator. So what we can do b squared over 4a squared. This one right here already has an a on the bottom. So let's just multiply by 4a on the top and on the bottom. Because 4a divided by 4a is 1. So we can multiply anything by 1. It's still the same. So that's legal. Alright, so now we have 4 times a divided by 4a squared. Oh, and then there's a c on top. I forgot. There we go. Alright, so now that we have this as our last step, we made a common denominator. Let's now put that in action. So now we have b squared minus 4ac. Oh, and now they have a common denominator. We could just say this is 4a squared. That's still equal to x plus b over 2a, all that squared. Alright, now what we can do is, now we can actually take the square root of both sides. So all of that right there. And so now what we have x plus b over 2a. And then because we square root both sides, we have to do plus or minus. And we have this big mess, b squared minus 4ac, all over 4a squared. Oh, the top looks right. Okay. So now what we can do is to subtract the b minus 2a on both sides. So we want x by itself. So now we have x equals negative b over 2a plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, and that is under still 4a squared. Okay, so now what we have with this, we know if we have a square root of a fraction, say 2 over 3, we can say that's the same thing as square root of 2 over the square root of 3. And so now we have negative b over 2a plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over the square root of 4a squared. Oh, and that should be the same thing. Let's do that over here. this thing on the bottom. So square root of 4ac squared. No, whoops. 4a squared. That should be the same thing as square root of 4 times the square root of a squared. Oh, so that's just 2 times a. So we know there's going to be negative b over 2a plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, that over 2a. Alright, and now that we have 2a on the bottom, we have a common denominator, so we can just merge the tops. So now we have negative b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Hey, the song just came in my head. That looks exactly like it is. And that's how you solve for that, for the quadratic formula.